You are about to enter a dimension not only of sight, sound, taste, or even mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. There's a signpost up ahead. Next stop, Jake Stief. Hi, long-haired freaky dude here, and today I'm going to review The Real Thomas Jefferson by Adrew Allison, Cleon Skousen, Richard Maxfield, and Delynn Cook. It is an elaborate yet simply written walkthrough of the life of one of the greatest men to have inhabited the earth, Thomas Jefferson. Before I proceed, I should state that I have not yet read another biography of Thomas Jefferson, so this review may be somewhat biased. So, what we have here is really two books, or two sections. The first part is the biography by Adrew Allison, and the second consists of the timeless treasures from Thomas Jefferson, which is an extensive, syntopically organized selection of quotes from the man himself, compiled by Skouson, Maxfield, and Cook. Since the book is really two completely different sections, it shall be reviewed as such. The first part, the actual biography of Jefferson, is read much like a narrative, which keeps the reader interested in the story. Now, any good bio on Jefferson would find it hard to make him sound uninteresting, but a narrative-like bio of him, that's just over the top and ideal for a casual reader. It was written very much in a way as Jefferson would have approved of. He believed that things, laws in particular, should be written in so simple and so sound a way so that anyone can understand what the text is implying. I found this book very easy to understand and believe that I was able to most efficiently absorb the facts presented. There are so many simply written details that it almost feels as if you had been a good friend of Jefferson's by the time you are done reading this book, and that you could confidently answer almost any question about him and his character. It covers many aspects of his life and appropriately designates amounts of information in ratio to their significance to history and Jefferson's life, so that your retaining of important information is not fogged out by the lesser of importance. The only topic which I was left feeling empty in and wanting to know more of was what his friendships were with various people and how they developed. Nonetheless, you see how he developed as a child and the conditions he grew up in. You see his thriving career as a lawyer and then a statesman, his role as an ambassador to France, his seat of presidency. You also see his private side and his love for family, serenity, and books, as well as his opinions on and thoughts on government, philosophy, religion, and other ideas. It's not uncommon for the actual words of Jefferson or his friends or foes to come in and dictate the course of the book. The author often uses quotes to not only back up or prove a point in the book, but to narrate it, which adds a good personal touch by Jefferson and his acquaintances. And along with the frequent use of quotes, nearly everything is sourced. While a large majority of the content of the book comes from the same few sources, they are primary sources, which happen to be the very writings of Thomas Jefferson. This may create a somewhat biased approach to some, and of his life, but there are other sources, when necessary, written by other people of his time. Never from some historian that never knew Jefferson in person. His use of primary sources also sheds light on the real Thomas Jefferson, not the man who some men in society have made him out to be. And when appropriate, Miller would shoot down and try to prove wrong with the power of fact some false statements made by modern historians. For example, many believe Jefferson supported slavery. From what Allison presents, however, this just isn't true. While he did own slaves, he did not treat them bad in any form, and he always tried to work towards the emancipation of them. He thought it hypocritical to own slaves after having freed his own self from tyranny, but realized that in a society where slaves are the norm, it is impossible to make a living off of a farm, which he enjoyed doing, without slaves, until the time came when owning slaves was illegal, and everyone must pay for labor. Anyway, to sum up the man I learned about from this section, he was a very diverse person, having knowledge in almost all subjects of the time, knew many languages, was well read, and always wanted to learn more. He invented many things, mostly for what he liked to do most, agriculture. He wanted to preserve the Republic. However, he took part in the political affairs of America. He wanted only to form a government which could best preserve our natural rights as man and make us as free as possible. Along with being the President of the United States, he was the President of a university, a scientific body, and an active member in many other associations. His character was also admirable, being very humble, firm to his beliefs, and able to keep opinions out of private affairs, wanting only peace among men. He was able to form a touching, lifelong relationship with one of his great political foes, John Adams, which is greatly and dramatically described in this book in such a way that brings you to tears when you reach the inevitable end. It's pretty good if an author can bring forth emotions in a biography, but beyond all that was his family, which he deemed to be most important and the greatest producer of happiness. He was, by all means, a polymath. To me, of the people I've read of, Jefferson is the closest to being what I deem the perfect man. Before I proceed to the second part of the review, I want to say one more thing which I've already touched up on, but want to add more emphasis on, for I think its symbolism to be great in how Jefferson and Adams were the true founders of the government of our nation, and how much significance they have in the free lives we live today. The relationship of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams is one of the most touching stories that I have ever read, having been able to see past their political differences and bond with one another on such a level that some of their last words were of each other when they both died on the same day, hours apart, the 4th of July and the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Beautiful. So for the second part of the book is an extensive selection of quotes from Jefferson, alphabetically indexed by topic. It is in this which makes the book something you want to own, not just rent or borrow. It is great for a quick reference on the beliefs and philosophies of Thomas Jefferson, and should be essential in the library of any American history or founding father fanatic. If you don't have the space or money for the 50-volume complete writings of Thomas Jefferson, or the condensed 20-volume Berg and Ford sets, then this is the next best thing, which I've come across, and therefore makes up for whatever price it's listed at. Also, the brief quotes selected from Jefferson make this selection totally readable. While it may take about 10 times longer to get through than the first part, it will be much more rewarding if you want to know more and touch up on the character and beliefs of Jefferson. I did read through all the quotes, and there was one thing which I found irksome, however. Some quotes were repeated throughout the index, but that is of course to aid its usefulness. I did not mind the repetition, but rather what I learned from the repetition. You see, to where there would be one small quote, it would sometimes be repeated, but this time with more context, and when read with the context, it completely changed what I had believed the quote to mean. So I can't help but to wonder what else I have misinterpreted due to the lack of context. I understand that to make the book more compact and affordable, some things were redacted, but is that worth chopping up the quote's actual meaning? While the meanings were not drastically altered or used to aid some conspiracy of the collaborators, it was changed nonetheless. For me, maybe not for you, and this was only to a very minimal amount of quotes. This does not, however, diminish the resourcefulness of this book in any way. Nonetheless, I have learned more about Jefferson than I ever thought I would from this book. He was a great admirable man of astounding history and character. If there were anyone I would want to most closely resemble, it would be him. So I thank you for watching a Bibliophile and LZ production, and I now leave you with reading an excerpt from the book, The Real Thomas Jefferson. The first part, not the second part. Chapter 1. If he were here, we might rebuild. Washington, D.C., with its classical architecture, broad avenues, and graceful landscapes, is regarded today as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But at the opening of the 19th century, it was still a rude village recently cut out of the Potomac's thick forest and sitting on a swampland that often turned its few ungravelled streets into miry pits of mud. In those days, the nation's new seat of government consisted of several crowded boarding houses, a tavern, and two unfinished federal buildings, the Capitol and the Executive Mansion. Every afternoon, about 1 o'clock, a plainly dressed gentleman near 60 years of age, whose appearance was very much like that of a tall, large-boned farmer, could be seen striding out of the Executive Mansion, mounting his thoroughbred stallion, and riding off alone toward the river or into the surrounding hills. He would be gone about 2 hours, exploring the countryside. Almost always he would return with some new botanical specimen. This became a familiar sight to the townspeople of Washington, but foreign dignitaries and other visitors were often surprised to discover that this ordinary-looking horseman was actually the President of the United States. He was also, in this case, an agriculturalist, an author, a musician, a paleontologist, an architect, an inventor, and 100 other things. He was Thomas Jefferson. An embarrassing introduction. One day, as President Jefferson was riding along one of the highways leading into Washington, he overtook a stranger who was making his way toward the city on foot. He drew up his horse and greeted the man, as was his custom. The traveler returned his greeting, and they immediately launched into a political discussion. People talked as freely about politics then as we do about the weather now. Not realizing whom he was addressing, the man indulged in some unkind remarks about the president, referring to several indecent and slanderous accusations which his political opponents had recently printed in the newspapers. Jefferson's first impulse was to bid the fellow a good day and ride on, but he was held by amusement at the situation. After listening a few more minutes, he asked the stranger whether he knew the president personally. "No," said the man, "nor do I wish to." "But do you think it fair," Jefferson asked, "to repeat such stories about a man whom you dare not face?" "I will never shrink from meeting Mr. Jefferson should he ever come my way." "Will you go to his house tomorrow at 10 o'clock and be introduced to him, if I promise to meet you there at that hour?" "Yes, I will," he decided after a moment's thought. Jefferson then excused himself, touching his hat to the traveler, and rode away toward Washington. When the man appeared at the Executive Mansion the next morning, a servant answered the door and escorted him down the hall to President Jefferson's office. As he came face to face with the president, he suddenly realized what had happened. Greatly embarrassed, but with gentlemanly bearing, he managed to say, "I have called Mr. Jefferson to apologize for having said to a stranger." "Hard things of an imaginary being who is no relation of mine," interrupted Jefferson, as he gave the man his hand, a warm, good-natural smile. The red-faced visitor turned out to be a merchant of high standing from Kentucky, and Jefferson insisted that he stay for dinner so that they could become better acquainted. He did stay, and was quickly won over to the president he had unknowingly insulted the day before. From that day forward, the merchant and his family were fiery Jeffersonians, like so many other Americans that quickly acquired a sincere affection for his tall, soft-spoken statesman from Virginia, and a deep commitment to the principles of freedom that he advocated. Well, that is the writing, narrative style of Allison. Hope you enjoy this book. Hope you read this book. And thank you for watching an LZ and Bibliophile Productions. And as always, be sure to have a great day.